Aloha and welcome back to Wanderous. Today, we're going to go to a castle that was turned into an amusement park for kids. What? So here's the thing. My great uncle was really excited to show me this place, but I was a little bit confused slash concerned when he didn't want to join me inside. Today we're talking about the hilarious Domo de Suscinio. So there's this castle called the Castle of Suscinio, and my great uncle bought me a ticket, but didn't want to go inside. Wanted to hang out with his girlfriend because apparently he had quote been there several times before. I didn't really know what to expect, but I go into this full on like it's what you would expect a castle would be, right? It's it has a drawbridge, it has a moat. It's cool. It's cool. It's a castle. It's cool. It's what you would think of as a castle. The courtyard in the middle was dusty and didn't really have much going on, but they had all of these. I don't. What's the best way to describe this place? I mean, it was cool because you could see everything from the upper area, and to get into the upper area, you went into the towers, right, the turrets, and they had these spiraling staircases, and they had these narrow halls where the archers would be. It was a real castle. It was a functioning fortress at one point, and someone had this brilliant idea to turn it into a kind of an amusement park, and I didn't realize this was aimed at kids. I don't know how I was supposed to feel about it. I mean, there was definitely some cool stuff inside. There was a whole description of the mythology of Arthur and his knights, and they had these rooms where they had these rooms of shadows and mythical creatures, and there was I think there was like a kind of like an animated dragon thing, and it was a riot. It was cool, but I felt a little old to be in there, to be honest. There was lookouts where if you were in the upper area, you could look down into another turret, and they had projected with like neon lights. They had these silhouettes and mythical creatures projected onto the walls. In the backyard, I saw from the turret there was actually I believe it was, yeah, that's right. I went down there afterward. There was an archery competition, but it was all for kids. The one thing I wanted to do though was something I couldn't do, which was a little bit depressing. I wanted to go on a boat in the moat, but because I was there alone, it wouldn't let me. And I wasn't going to ask a random family, "Hi, can I come with you guys in the boat?" Because, yeah, it would have been a little strange. But they had a room as well where you could dress up as a knight. There's all this kind of stuff. So they also had like board games, and one of them was draughts, which is also called checkers. There are several games that are like this, and this whole thing about how it's teaching you how to play checkers. Apparently, that's the American name. Apparently, that's the American name for checkers. They call it other things in other countries. And it was invented in the 12th century when someone somewhere, probably in the south of France, combined the rules and pieces of alcroquet with an 8x8 grid of common chessboard, and they called the game Fiergs, and the pieces Thyrses. But it was very funny, the kids were dressing up, and I felt pretty out of place. That whole day was quite nice though, because we even though I felt very triggered at the moment because I didn't have anybody to go on the boat with, and I started to doubt myself. I was like, why am I? Is this what's you have these moments of like, should I try to find a travel partner after this when I'm done visiting my family? Would that be a more enjoyable experience? And that's a question that did linger in my mind for a few months after that. A people always ask you, like, especially my female friends, they ask, like, oh, are you traveling alone? And people can get weird. People can get weird if you're traveling alone. I shouldn't say people get weird. People's reactions to your choices, they go, oh, I can't believe this. Who would do this? Who would travel alone? And it's like, well, people have their own reasons for traveling alone. Traveling alone can be absolute magic because you don't need to compromise about where you want to go. You don't need to rush away from a painting that you might be in love with, for instance. Although I don't think that happened to me, but it's just an example that popped into my head. You can really go with the flow, and I actually believe now that it's more skillful to travel alone when you're in a different culture because it forces you to communicate more with the locals. It encourages you to make friends. Some of the best friendship experiences happened to me when I was traveling alone, especially with couch surfing. We're going to get to some pretty entertaining couch surfing experiences later on in the French chapter of this story. That won't really happen until I get down to Marseille. Marseille is in the south, and we're not quite there yet. The other great thing about that day going around to Suscinio, which they had a bit of a description here, the creation of the Suscinio domain by the dukes in the peninsula, yeah, that's right, in the first half of the 13th century is probably due to a vast forested area that was covering a large part of this region, but also to the proximity of the sea, offering access to maritime trade and food diversification through fishing. The domain is also suitable for exploiting the salt marshes, which we talked about in the last episode, allowing the export of salt, which is a key element in food preservation. Very, very important. Since antiquity, they didn't have refrigeration. The only way to keep, especially things like meat, but all kinds of food, they had to put salt in it to dry it out. Salt is naturally antibacterial. So it has a very high economic value. It seems that the origin of the exploitation of salt in Suscinio goes back to the Gallo-Roman era, well into about 1,000 years ago. But the other lovely part of that day was that we ended up cycling all around. My great uncle was a very active man, and is a very active man, and he agreed to meet me back outside of the castle after I think it was like 2 hours or so, which is an appropriate amount of time. And we cycled all the way back. I think, yeah, we cycled all the way back to his girlfriend's house, or most of the way. And that was almost as enjoyable as the castle itself because the traffic was very low. It was kind of a rural area. So we were just going through these cool little shortcuts and going through the forest and these paths that were made. And it is a great regret of mine that I don't have any photos of those bike paths because they were quite nice. But I do have photos of the salt man's domain, which I think is even more interesting. So at least we have that. But all of these photos, of course, are for people who support the show. Currently at $10 per month, you will get photos every single Wednesday, high quality photos, originally shot in RAW format. So the following day, which was, this is a very big week. The salt guy was Monday. This is Tuesday. On Wednesday, we go to an ancient site called the Carnac stones, the alignments de Carnac. Now, the Carnac stones, apparently, from the best data that we have been there longer than Stonehenge was. And so essentially this site is a series of lines, perhaps 7 lines of stones, but they're spaced apart. They're spaced several meters apart. And when you get there, it just sort of looks like a cemetery a bit. But when you look at it from the right perspective, you see that these are lines of stone, the alignments. And they stretch back to, some people believe the stones date, with our best technology, we found that the stones date even as far back as 4,000 BC, which is pretty wild. some of the stones, not all of them. Most of them were around 3300 BC, so within a few hundred years of when Stonehenge was originally being constructed. But according to Neil Oliver's BBC documentary, and I thought this was pretty cool, I did a little bit of research for this one, was that the difference between this and Stonehenge was that Stonehenge was made by farmers, Neolithic farmers, but Carnac was originally constructed by Mesolithic hunters. So it's a different category, and people still very much debate which people actually created Carnac, because when you start to go back that far into prehistory, which, you're kind of in the vaguely prehistory at that point, not too much paper around back then, these kinds of truths do unfortunately get lost in the haze of time, especially in sites that get updated and have had such a long history. 1,000 years pass, the stones are still there, and a new group decides to add a few stones, or they change the meaning of what's already there, or they change a little bit of the story. So the stories are like this are always evolving and always changing. We had a nice time. I mean, looking back now, I think my great uncle was just happy that someone had finally visited from America. It had been many years, maybe like 10 years, since anybody of his extended family, which I was a part, had visited from America. The next place we stopped by was Saint-Cado. Now, Saint-Cado, not to be confused with Saint-Malo. Saint-Malo and Saint-Cado, it started to mix. Everything, all of the songs started to mix in my mind at this point. But this part of France is pretty interesting and weird. There's a Itel River, a Rivière d'Itel. It's basically this sort of like marshy inner area with all these little islands that is an inland sort of bay that just comes in from the Atlantic. And I'm going to try to describe this, but we went to a very, Saint-Cado is an interesting place. Let's just say that. So I don't really know how to summarize Saint-Cado. We weren't there that long, but it was another one of these ancient feeling little towns with a lot of stone masonry work and sort of a bay that was coming in all around us. But the most memorable thing was the little chapel that we visited. Very small. And they had this area in the chapel, and there was a description of it. Oh, where is it? I have a photo of this very odd area that it was a sunken depression that someone couldn't have enough space to lie down in, but there was a hole where you could kind of just rest your head in the hole. And there was some story about how someone had been healed there. So they saved this area as a depression. I'm probably misremembering this, but there was some mythology about this little sunken area. Please feel free to Google and tell me that I'm totally wrong about this, but there was some mythology around this sunken area in the Saint-Cado chapel. It was all dedicated to sailors, of course. There were small models of boats and different dedications all around. They had a stone, Jesus on a cross thing on the outside. It was a very cold, very blustery kind of vibe, probably because the weather was blustery that day. But it was the strangest thing I've ever seen in a church, because you have a normal altar, you have stained glass, you have the votives, you have the candles, but just in the middle of this church was this sunken depression. So if anybody wants to maybe see if they can find something else about this, find something out. I think it's going to mostly be in French, a lot of the sources here. Feel free to check that out, because I don't really, I'm not really sure how to figure out exactly what was going on there. But it took us about 2 hours to get back from that funny little adventure. We spent some time looking at the people on the boats and the strange house on the island. There was a full-on stone house with blue shutters. That's a funny sight. That's going to go in the bonus as well. And we finally get back to my great uncle's house, and I'm really struck for the first time how many books, how lovely his bookshelf is. I don't think I feel comfortable necessarily sharing the inside of my great uncle's house. Oh my God. They have a Bali map. Huh. So funny, the things, the foreshadowing that you see in your own life later on. But one of the things that he would do was that he is quite a passionate photographer himself. He takes amazing photos, better than mine. And he had a whole compendium of photo books that he had printed of his visits. He's quite the traveler. So he had Indi du Sud, which of course is southern India, 2015, Australia. He went back to Australia he went in 16 and 18. Rajasthan, Peru, Laos, Bolivia, Chile, Java. He went to Java in 2019. Wow. I hadn't even appreciated all these at the time. Corsica, Vietnam, New Zealand, Tasmania. And we had several nice evenings and afternoons where we would flip through these photo books and glimpse his quite wonderful travels across the world. Funny fact, and I tell people this from time to time, his two favorite countries, extremely well-traveled man, probably been to 42 countries, right? Guess his two favorites in the whole world. It's not what you would expect. I don't know if he ranked these, but he said his two favorites were Jordan, which I could totally get. Jordan, of course, is where Petra is, most famously depicted recently is using the term loosely, but in the film The Last Crusade with Harrison Ford and Sean Connery in 1989. Was it 89? I think it was 89. The Last Crusade came out. The last, in the trilogy, the original trilogy of Indiana Jones. Fifth movie was good, though. I thought the fifth movie was good. If you've seen the fifth movie and didn't think it was good, it's fine. The Petra is it's carved into a cliffside, an amazing example of something that looks incredible from the outside, but you actually can't really go in, apparently. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's very much a facade. But they used it for one of the important temple scenes in The Last Crusade. So you really believe when you see the movie that there is a whole labyrinth of traps and gold and stuff inside, but it's not true, unfortunately. But Petra was something that he got to visit in Jordan, but his other favorite country was Cambodia, which the French call Cambodia. Several languages, in fact, refer to it as Cambodia. As of this recording, I have not yet visited Cambodia, but it is on my radar. And he loved Cambodia. He thought the wealth of history and the people was just wonderful. But I really respected his taste with this, because a lot of people would be like, "Oh, New Zealand is the most beautiful country in the world," which New Zealand is a very, very beautiful place. But for him to say Jordan, I thought was such a cool choice. Jordan and Cambodia. Cambodia, which, like, from my research, looks like it has very difficult weather, a very difficult climate. So, kind of a cool choice for him to make. You can tell he's not a shallow traveler. He really wants to understand deeply the people around him. I had an interview once with an old show I did called Ascendant. Actually, no, it was before that. I think I called it doesn't matter. And I interviewed people who make vegan gelato in Hawaii. And my guest, Sean, said that he said something that really struck me. He said, when you go to a new place, it's really helpful. It can be really powerful and wonderful if you let that place change you in the process of going there. Don't leave the same person who arrived. Now, that doesn't mean you should traumatize yourself. It doesn't mean you should cross your own intuition boundaries or anything like that. But be open to having your explanations for life challenged. Be open to having your presumptions, right? Your assumptions and your presumptions challenged in the process. I have all these photos of my great uncle's backyard. He was quite a kind of a gardener. I don't know if people want to see random flowers. I'm wearing socks, black socks, without shoes. I don't know why. I really don't know why. I think we left the shoes in the front of the house. So this is the afternoon where I helped him. When I helped him do some weeding, cleaned out some stuff. This is the real experience. The real experience. The real experience. The following day, we went to the Saint-Cado market, the farmer's market, where there were tons of beautiful hand-woven baskets. Yeah. And pastries that I couldn't eat. Pomme apple pastries, because so many of them had cream inside, and I would just have gotten sick. It was quite frustrating at times, the amount of things that had cream, but you know, the French are famous for this. And incredible, he took me to a bakery. You know, this is not groundbreaking information, but incredible baked bread, and the baguettes were vegan, which was nice. So just photographing the breads, even all the breads are pretty much photogenic in France. It's true what they say. So I think I'll wrap up this episode with a bit about the hike along Saint-Cado's coast in low tide, which actually looked kind of ugly, but they have these, I'm going to say this little photo of berries, that you wouldn't want to eat, but parts of it were actually quite beautiful. Just parts were sort of like, you know, low tide in some places, just like, ooh, and other parts you go, oh. And we were walking along, you know, this gravel path in many places, and we came across this whole collection of albino cows. It was very random. I even took a video of that one, which I might include. These are the cutest little albino, they're full grown, just albino cows. It was so pastoral. It was so peaceful walking by this area. And I, meanwhile, I'm trying to make good conversation with my great uncle's girlfriend, and I can't because I don't know enough French.